Welcome to the first day of June 2022, your day weather podcast brought to you by Cowboy State Daily. Cowboy State Daily has more original Wyoming news content than any other news organization in the state. Sign up at Cowboy State Daily for their daily newsletter and check them out on their Facebook page. Welcome to June. This is from the Highway 130 area of the Snowy Range Pass west of Laramie in the what's called the Green Rock area. Some new snow overnight for the southern mountains of Wyoming, and a lot of video and a lot of images like this in the mountains of northern and central Colorado as well. So June off to a bit of a cool and snowy start. It is going to be a really cool day relative to average. Most locations are averaging, when you look at average temperatures here for the first day of June, they're at least around 70, some areas the middle to upper 70s, but we're only going to be 50s and 60s in many areas today. We'll continue to see areas of rain, cloudy and cool weather across central and eastern areas of Colorado. Now there's a warm up starting tomorrow with more typical early June weather Friday through Sunday. Actually, it looks like textbook early June weather with comfortably mild temperatures, nothing too warm. And then afternoon and evening thunderstorms are going to be around, especially along and east of the Continental Divide, especially along and east of Interstate 25. Those areas are going to be in the best position to pick up late day showers and thunderstorms, not as much activity west of the Continental Divide. We're going to have a moderate start to June. For those of you who remember June 2021, June 2021 was hot. It was a very hot and dry month, and that was one reason why we started off summer really on the wrong foot last year. But the first 10 days of June, very moderate, meaning we're not going to get too hot. We see temperatures closer to average and some decent chances of shower and thunderstorm activity in some areas. So we don't see this June starting off like last June. Also, at the end of this podcast, I'm going to be talking about what is in the news constantly. Is this really the worst drought in the last 12 centuries? I'm going to throw a little bit of water on some of these headlines that you've been hearing about this. A lot of what you're hearing has been misinterpreted, unfortunately, by the media, and some wrong perceptions are being set. And I'm going to show you why. I'll show you the data. Taking a look at the satellite imagery, you can see the low pressure system still causing areas of showers and thunderstorms across the region. The upper level low is right here. You can see the swirl of clouds right here. So it's beginning to move out of the region. But down here in eastern Colorado, along the Front Range and into these areas here, there'll be showers and thunderstorms today, then more showers and thunderstorms heading into the Midwest. But you can look out west here and see clearing skies and high pressure moving on in. So what that's going to do is that's going to warm us up. And today you can see quite nicely, it's kind of an unusual to see them spaced so evenly like this. Look at these three low pressure systems across North America lined up and spaced very evenly apart. Usually don't see Mother Nature act so symmetrically like that, but briefly, it's not a long period of time, we're lined up like this. And what will happen is we have this tail of low pressure coming through right now. We just saw it on the satellite imagery, but a more westerly flow is beginning to develop, and that'll bring more mild air in. Now, as we get into Friday, we see the lows beginning to stretch out a little bit, with the lows still here and this low off the west coast of British Columbia. This low is going to kind of stall out here, but what it will do is it will throw small disturbances towards the central and northern Rockies while keeping temperatures mild. Those disturbances, when interacting with daytime heating, is going to lead to some afternoon and evening thunderstorm activity. And by Tuesday into Wednesday of next week, we have a frontal system that'll come through, keeping our temperatures from getting too warm and bringing more scattered showers and thunderstorms to the northern and central plains and the northern and central Rockies. As we get into early next week, especially around Tuesday and Wednesday next week, may have to watch out for severe weather. That'll be something we're going to keep an eye on. If you look at temperatures for today, look how cold these temperatures are for the first day of June. Very, very cool start to the month of June across a large part of the west with all those blue, green, and purple areas there. Now let's take a look. We'll step you through how it's going to go. We showed you these maps yesterday. So as you plan your weekend, we're looking at afternoon and evening thunderstorms. I know a lot of you probably are going to try to get out this weekend because you couldn't last weekend. But you got to plan on afternoon and evening thunderstorms. But it's going to be warm. You can see anywhere you see the green, the blue, and the red and the yellows here, this is the prediction of where lightning strikes could occur. So the more dense areas of color is where the higher frequency of thunderstorm activity will be. So that's Friday. That's Saturday and that's Sunday. And you can see there's a real tendency for areas along and east of the divide to be picking up the best chances of showers and thunderstorms. And that's going to continue. That trend will continue into Monday, Tuesday, and probably Wednesday of next week. And you can see the precipitation forecast. This is for the 5-day period from basically Saturday through Wednesday. So you can see across the Pacific Northwest, across the Northern Rockies, there's going to be some shower and thunderstorm activity. Could be quite a bit of it across the Dakotas, Nebraska, parts of Kansas, more maybe for eastern Colorado. West Texas gets into the act a little bit, and even parts of New Mexico. But you can see the Great Basin states, the Four Corners area, still looking at a dry pattern here for a little bit longer. And these are the 10-day temperatures. This is what we mean by a moderate start to June. This is the average temperature pattern for the first 10 days of June. If you add up the first 10 days of June, these are your temperature anomalies based on the 30-year historical averages. So other than the Great Basin states in the southwest there, the rest of the northern plains, central and northern Rockies, won't be off to a hot start by early June standards. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this because I do believe that there's a lot of news outlets that are misinterpreting the study that came out about a year ago about this being the worst drought since the year 800 AD. This headline was just right out of the Billings Gazette here recently. The reason that I'm going to bring up some of these points is the study that this article and many other articles quoting is for something that was made in the Four Corners area of the western United States. And the paper did not say the entire western United States was part of this study. The desert Southwest was, but not the northern and central Rockies nor the Pacific Northwest. But unfortunately, it's been rolled up into saying that it was the entire western United States that this study references, and that's just not true. But we're seeing these headlines out of public radio, out of the New York Times. Yes, certainly parts of the southwestern United States going on tree ring analysis is showing that there was certainly some really dry periods, and this current dry period may rival some dry periods historically found on tree rings. But keep in mind, tree ring analysis of roof beams. Now, so we're talking about roof beams of archaeological sites in Chaco Canyon in northwest New Mexico. So we're not even talking about tree rings from trees recovered, but from roof beams. Not to say that that's not going to make this invalid. The paper actually uses a lot of tree ring analysis that can be quite useful. But we cannot take one site in northwestern New Mexico and apply that to the central and northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. You just can't, but it's being interpreted that way. Why do I say that? I'll show you here in a minute. So this is where it's located, right here. So the tree ring analysis from archaeological sites of roof beams was taken from there. So we could say, all right, from this particular area, the way the climatology tends to work in this region, this area right there that I just broadly outlined, that study is valid for. But how this is being interpreted to include all of these areas up here is just, well, it's just not correct. Well, let's take a look. If you look at some of the other literature out there, not only are tree rings important and a good guide to use as what we call as proxies, is try to estimate temperature historically and precipitation historically from past time frames, but it's not perfect. You cannot take tree rings and say with certainty that it's an exact representation of a region-wide or a continent-wide climate pattern. You can look at these tree rings and make some good assumptions on local weather conditions, but stretching it out over a whole region is, in my opinion, is a really big stretch. So let's take a look at some data here. Now, if we were to take a look at the way the Weather Service breaks up some regions, if we were to take a look of right here of what they call the West region. So when we take a look at precipitation data, you got to keep in mind that we do not have hundreds or thousands of years of rainfall data. At best, in most of the western United States, we may have a few locations that have maybe 100, 120 years of good rainfall data, measured data from rain gauges, people measuring it. That's it. Our record is extremely short, but the record that we do have for this western region right here does show this over the last 100 years. Actually, The precipitation trend in the last century has actually gone up almost 0.8 of an inch of precipitation going back to 1923, which is about when we had good rainfall records. I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, the worst measured precipitation in the last 100 years in those western states, right here in the gray areas, occurred 1976 and 1977. If you look currently where we're at right here, we're not near, we're close, but we're not right on top of 1996, 1997. So it's really hard to take that study and say that it's the worst drought since 800 AD in the central and northern Rockies in the Pacific Northwest. If you look at the states included there, you can see that we're not looking at, if you want to talk about the worst drought in the last 100 years, 76, 77 in the West, we're close, but we're not there yet. And then if you go back into the early 20s there, and historically the trend of precipitation over the last 100 years is actually up. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look for California and Nevada here, in this region right here. It's a very flat trend line. It's actually up just under 0.4 of an inch for the century. And again, 1976 and 1977 sticks out as a very dry period. Very dry period right now. But if you want to really say that it's the worst drought since the year 800 AD in all of the western United States, you do have some measured data that contradicts that claim. However, people are applying this claim to Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. As we showed you earlier, the desert Southwest and the Four Corners area, maybe you can apply that statement, but you have to keep in mind tree rings are approximate, they're not exact measured precipitation data. They're a good guide, they're a very useful tool, but it's a very strong claim to say it's the worst drought in the last 1,200 years for a large part of the western United States. So if you were to look over the last 100 years, 2016 and 17 in the West was the wettest year on record in the last 100 years. 23 and 24 are worse than they are currently. If you really want a bad decade, look at the 1930s and 1940 for a large part of the nation. So all my point is here is be really careful. A lot of what is brought out in the media is misimplied or misinterpreted. Yes, this drought is bad. Yes, it's causing lots of problems and will continue to cause problems through the rest of 2022. But sometimes you've got to go back and drill down into the data to get perspective on things that you're hearing in the news. We showed you this graphic before. These cold and warm cycles of the Pacific lead to drought periods right here when you have lots of La Niñas, wet periods here where you have more El Niños, and you go right back into these cycles again. We are in a cold PDO pattern right now, and it's going to likely be a few years before we go to a warm PDO. But we will, and you'll see, as you see in this graph here, the weather is a sine wave, folks. Precipitation is a sine wave, and it will go back up as we head on into the let's say the late 2020s. Thanks for listening and watching the Day Weather Podcast. We'll see you tomorrow.